Greetings, everyone, friends. Hello, Calais and Alexis. Bedlington Groomer, noteworthy. Nancy. Becky, noteworthy. Antonio, Rob. Greetings, my friends. Bethany. David, lovely to see so many of you here. Bedlington asked, where are you, Alexis, while we were in that little opening? Alexis, did you answer? I would love to know too, because I was watching the chat and I thought that would be great to know, Alexis. Alex, welcome, Alex and Nathaniel, piano keys. Wonderful. Oh, we've got a great crowd here today. Lovely. Well, I thought, we'd kick off with some music that I have actually never shared publicly before. Hello, Dith. That was a performance from 2008. A long time ago. And there is no video from that performance, so you got a little snippet that no one else has ever heard. I don't think Alexis... Alexis, we'll continue to look for your answer of where you're tuning in from. Kenya just came in. Awesome. Welcome. Okay. Well, this is great. We're going to kick off today with a bit from Antonio, which if you read in the description, Antonio has been working on Almost Blue for a little bit, and we're going to hear a fresh performance from him and check that out. And then the rest of the session, I actually don't think that's going to take all that long, Antonio. The rest of the session is going to be completely open to any questions, whatever. Antonio, the volume of your video is perfect. I actually could leave it right where it was this time instead of having to turn it down for the stream. Because my volume, because of how aggressively I tend to play, the piano tends to clip. So I have to have mine turned down pretty significantly. Anyway, let's jump into Antonio's playing. Without further ado, Almost Blue. Antonio, who wrote Almost Blue? If you could help us out with that. Who wrote the piece? It's a jazz standard. And Antonio, I believe, is playing this kind of coming up with your own arrangement by ear, a little bit from listening to a recording, but also just doing some experimentation with playing and arranging and harmonizing yourself. All right. Alexis, Chet Baker. Thanks for answering that, Alexis. Okay, let's jump into Antonio. I'm going to get that queued up and we'll take a listen. All right. Lovely work, Antonio. Lovely, lovely work. Let's give Antonio a round of applause in the chat. Yes, Rob says, sounds wonderful. Great stuff. Oh, and hello, Alan. Welcome. Antonio, remind all of us, how long have you been experimenting with this piece? I believe that we heard from you toward the end of last year, working on this. Yeah, Antonio, has it been, a couple months? It's about forever. Does it feel like forever, or has it really been a long time? Like, is this a piece that you've played a lot, like over years, or is it something that you just started playing around with within the last 6 months? That isn't really going to affect what my comments for Antonio, but I just thought that would be a fun thing to share. Hey, Antonio, you say the problem is every time I feel that you feel that you're done, I suggest something new. That is, music and learning about music is a never-ending process. I'll include myself in that as well. There's always more we can do. And so there comes a point in time where we have to draw a line and say, okay, we've done great work with this piece. This applies to everybody. We've done great work with the piece. Sounds wonderful. We've learned a lot. It's time to move on and explore something else. That isn't to say that in a year or 2 years or 5 years, you could come back and you'll be playing it differently and you'll have learned other things in the meantime, right? Gosh, I think everybody that is here that has played for a while will agree with that. So Antonio, even though, sure, I still have some suggestions, I'm actually going to keep them very short this time because I think you've done a wonderful job and you've come a super long way from the first time we heard you play this. But it's been a long time working on the piece and it's probably time to say, hey, I've learned a lot. Let's move on and play something else. And especially, maybe you've done that already and you're already throwing other things in your repertoire. So, first comment, Antonio, and it's something I've said before. You got to listen to your pedaling. There's a lot of blur happening, and we're not hearing as clearly as we could all of the beautiful harmonies that you're choosing and the voicings that you're choosing because there's just a lot of them are getting mushed together. So, is that something that happens when you, for example, make a video? Especially when we're taking lessons or we're filming something, for example, for the stream here, or maybe you're filming it to post somewhere else online. It's very normal to feel nervous about that, and things change a little bit about how we play. So we want to learn from that experience also. Is that pedaling thing something for Antonio, for example? Does it just happen when you film the video? And is it cleaner at other times? One way to try to figure that out, because sometimes it can be difficult if we're not used to listening to ourselves while we play. If we're really engaged in the act of what our hands are doing, listening, it's almost like a distraction. It's important. It's very important to learn how to do that, but it can be really difficult to do that. So one way to do that is record yourself all the time. So Antonio, do you do that? And anybody else that is working on repertoire, how often do you record yourself? Like once a week? More? Is it only once a month? Is it never? Which direction do you fall? And the more often you record yourself and you listen back and you learn from hearing yourself play, noteworthy, I'm going to come back to that in a second, actually, what you just said. But the more often you do these kinds of recordings, the better you're going to understand how to listen to yourself, and the more comfortable you're going to be performing, at least on camera and in that particular style. It will probably also translate, for those of you who want to playing in front of people. It will ease that a little bit. It's not exactly the same, but it will help. Bethany, you say Piano Tech records literally everything, so all the time. And Antonio, you do practice your recording sessions and you're working on pedaling. Great. So that's a wonderful thing to be doing. Becky, you said you're guilty of so many recordings that eventually become numb to it. That isn't quite a bad thing, I would say. If you record yourself so often that it doesn't make you nervous anymore, okay, now we can't use that process maybe to practice for a performance anymore if that performance, if we do feel anxious about it or there's something like that, we're not going to be able to simulate that stress. But your recordings, when the stress is gone, your recordings are going to really show you what you're actually doing in your practice. And they're not going to be changed or filtered in any way by the stress of the current moment. So they're just as important in a slightly different way. Yeah, Bethany, you say video recording makes you almost as nervous as an audience. That's a really good thing. That's a great tool to have at home to experience that, especially if you're going to play in front of an audience. Alexis, you say at like every practice session, but not full recordings, but little bars. That's wonderful. Yes. Okay, great. So going back to Antonio, wonderful that you're doing that. Continue to use that tool to help you work on pedaling. That is my biggest comment for you today is just we want that part of your playing to become so automatic that when it doesn't happen, your ears are stunned in a bad way and say, oh, that sounds bad. I need to change the pedal and I need to do it right now. Even if it's in the middle of the measure, we need to, having a clean pedal and maybe some sound that's a little less full is going to be better to have just some single notes that are very clean than have harmonies blended together like all of that. So we want to get our ears to the point where they recognize that during our playing, and even if we're not going to be changing the pedal in the best place possible, our ears tell our foot, change it, change it. It's better to change it now than to forget and to let it continue to keep blurring. Yeah? Another comment for you, Antonio. Are you able to, as you've done this great work expanding your harmonization in the left hand, and the last time we talked about it, you were going to add in some things that weren't just kind of a closed position, blocked chords, right? But you were adding in some other things, so some bass notes. Wonderful. I have a little bit of the sheet music up you sent me last time. But, yeah. So you did a great job adding those kinds of notes. Are you able to play your left hand, most of your left hand, depending on how improvised it is? Are you able to play it without the right hand being involved? And I ask that knowing that it might be a very difficult thing to do because you're not truly playing off of a notated piece of music. But I bring it up because I think it would have a positive impact for you if you worked on one texture, let's say accompaniment, and whatever's going on, and you worked on keeping it really in time. When we don't have to worry about the phrase the melody's making, we can really purely think about the jumps and making sure that rhythm is nice and steady. Especially in a jazz standard, I think if we can think about the left hand more like a stand-up bass player and the drum kit working together and just keeping that nice, perfect, rhythmic bed for us to play on top of. That's what we want the left hand to be doing here. And then the right hand can have a lot more freedom, which is my third comment for you, Antonio. If you, and maybe the best step to do here is if you wanted to go back and simplify the left hand to work on the right hand. So we still have some harmony to play with, but as the right hand is making phrases, can you show a little bit more inflection in those phrases? And can it not be so strictly metronomic? Because you're doing a great job of keeping things in time with the right hand. we want to shift a little bit of that focus to the left and have the left hand do the majority of that work and have the right hand be a little more free. And I'm sure, Antonio, you listen to many jazz singers, especially. You know how free they are feeling the beat, yet everything stays together. You might even, if there are some tunes that you know and some great recordings you love, or tunes you can figure out a few phrases of just the melody, try playing along with the singer on a recording. Because, especially if it's a singer with a jazz combo group or something like that, because you're still going to be hearing the underlying pulse that keeps everything together, but also experiencing just how far, especially in jazz, that the soloist pushes and pulls that. I know that you know what it sounds like because you listen to a lot of the music. Try playing along with some of it too. Yeah. Antonio, do you have any questions for me? Because honestly, those are the three things that I really wanted to mention. And overall, you've done a fantastic job from where this started when we first heard it from you some months ago, back in 2024. So do you have any questions that I didn't talk about? Or does anybody else have any questions about what I just mentioned about Antonio's playing and what to work on? I'm happy to answer. So you say, Antonio, you say the problem with this piece is that the original version is with bass and drums and yours is solo. Yeah. So we want to introduce that pulse. You said the pulse is missing. We want to introduce that pulse and try to introduce more of it in the left hand because you're doing more playing of, you're playing rhythms throughout the bar, which is great. We just want to be sure that they stay steady and that the left hand isn't doing too much push and pull and too much rubato, because if it does some and the right hand does some, then we start to lose track of, because we're not in your head. As a listener, we lose track of where the beat actually is. And we can't tell where you're feeling it anymore because it's not being given to us. That also pertains to everybody here that's studying classical piano too. We might talk about it in a slightly different way, but we always want to give the listener a great sense of where the pulse is. Even if in classical music we're taking rubato and the pulse is shifting and moving around, that's really important to keep the listener with us and engaged. Because when they lose track of where our beat is, the music and the natural emphasis that music has, just like when we speak, there's a natural emphasis, that starts to go away and it makes less and less sense to somebody who's listening. And it's similar to hearing somebody speak, let's say in a language that you're very familiar with, but when the inflection is in the wrong place, or it's not where you expect, over and over again, it starts to become very difficult to understand, right? Antonio, you said, would it help to practice with a slow metronome pulse like the brush snare for left hand? Yeah, I think that would be good. Gosh, even Antonio, I know. Oh, by the way, I wanted to ask you, did you use a VST when you played this? I liked the tone a lot of the piano. And if you are, and you're in a DAW, or you're in some program where you could set up like a drum trigger, or you could set up some samples to play against, that would be great too. Even if it's just if you have an 8-bar jazz drum loop and play along with that, that would be great. That would be, you could work on the left hand and keeping the left hand in time with that. You can also work on the right hand and creating that push and pull against the perfectly steady drums and bass. Antonio, the 2-microphone mix of the Princeton Steinway. For people that are interested in VSTs and such, I believe that library that Antonio played his recording on, it's, is it free, Antonio? It's either free or it's a very nominal amount of money, isn't it? And I thought it had a nice tone. Nathaniel, you said, so were you saying that the left hand can be practiced with a metronome? Oh, yeah. You asked almost the same question as Antonio. I think I answered that in my last response to Antonio. Less about counting. We don't really care where beat 1 and 3 and 4 are, but we want to be able to predict them. So it doesn't matter. You don't have to count 1, 2, 3, 4, but we should feel that the pulse never goes away. I'm going to just try and experiment with some harmony that's kind of related to what you played. So there was some push and pull in what I just did, but the underlying pulse was always constant, and it was constant in my mind. I wasn't thinking I'm on beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, beat 4, but I was thinking bum, 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 bum. And everything was played around that pulse. If you need a metronome to help you hear that, absolutely use one, or use a fancy metronome like Antonio just mentioned, or like I just mentioned, which would be like a programmed drum kit. Yeah. Cool. Great stuff. Antonio, you said yes, that sample library is free. That would, oh my gosh, I love talking about this stuff on the stream because I think, especially for people, if you play on a digital mostly, or only play on a digital, it is so worth the time, and in this case, no money at all, to figure out how to use your digital with a sample library, because it is going to sound so much better and be so much more engaging and fun to play your digital if you use one of those rather than the onboard sounds. Gosh, Antonio, if you have the ability either now or at the end of the stream to leave a link about where to get that library, I think that would be a fantastic resource for everybody, because it's not often you get a really, really good sounding library that doesn't cost anything. It's usually at least a few $100s. And I totally get if some people don't want to spend that, especially if they aren't very comfortable with technology, but this is an opportunity to get started and try it, and all that's at stake is your time in learning how to use it, which I think it's worth it. Absolutely. Okay. Antonio, do you have any other questions for me? Otherwise, we can wrap this part of the stream up, and we can move on to just questions from everybody. And you say you did a little EQ later. Sounds like not as a part of what you just did, but Antonio, it makes me so happy that you're doing that experimentation. I love it. Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't we give Antonio another round of applause in the chat for doing some great work. Antonio, there's always things we can learn, of course, but I wouldn't continue to feel like you have to work on this daily. If you want to know that it's really in your fingers, you might do a couple minutes, 5 minutes at a time. Try to play a little bit with a drum track or with a metronome, and just continue to enjoy playing the piece now that it is so much more comfortable for you than where you were before. So if you were my in-person student, I would give you the signature of approval to say, good work, we've learned a lot, it's time to move on. Okay, Antonio, let's talk about that next. And just for everybody, if you have questions and you've tuned in with questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I will go one by one. Antonio had another question he emailed me about that we'll kick off this conversation with. And then I'll just go one by one as the questions come in, and we'll talk about whatever you want to. Okay, Antonio, you had asked me a question about a Petrov Mistral. Is it a minstrel or Mistral? And you asked my opinion of Petroff pianos. I have not played a massive number of Petroffs. I've not played that particular model, I don't believe. Two stick out in my mind. I've played more than that, but usually at dealerships, piano dealers, just kind of going around and trying instruments out when I visit. But I've played two that were in public spaces. And one was approximately a 7-foot, and the other was their concert grand. And it's been a long time, so I can't speak to perhaps the design of Petroffs today, because the last one I played was maybe 15 years ago. So it's been a while. But there were a couple things I noticed that were in common between those two instruments that I can talk a little bit about. First off, I do believe that Petroff is the only piano manufacturer that uses the A graph, which is a part in the piano. It's a if you have an acoustic or you've seen an acoustic, the strings for most of the instrument pass through this little brass piece. It's very small, maybe a centimeter or two tall, and it is. Can I even see them on mine? Yes. It looks like it's affixed to the plate. So it's very solid. It might even, I don't think it's designed as a part of that, but the strings pass through the A graph and they then extend down the rest of the instrument. So the A graph ends up doing two jobs. It puts the string in the perfectly correct position for the instrument for the rest of the length, the speaking length of the string. Hello, Mia. And it also provides the first termination point, or the termination point of the speaking length that's closest to the pin block. Most piano manufacturers use A graphs from the bass end of the instrument to the maybe mid to upper treble range. So maybe 2/3 of the instrument have those, and the very top end of the instrument doesn't. I'm including really big manufacturers like Steinway doesn't use A graphs in the top third of the instrument. Mason Hamlin doesn't. Bosendorfer doesn't. Petroff does. And the other manufacturers, I think they don't, because the string length becomes so short at the top of the instrument. It's not as big of a concern that the strings are in the perfectly correct position, because there's not a lot of room that they're going to shift around from if the entire string length is only a foot long in this area of the piano, which it maybe on a concert grand it would be, and some of these might even be shorter. That's not very long of a speaking length. But Petroff uses that component all the way up, which ensures a really, really fantastic termination point. So we're not going to have sound leak. The rest of the instruments use a capo bar, or some piano techs call it a V bar. And all of the strings pass under the capo bar, and that is the other termination point. But it's just a flat surface under there. There's no precise point that the string passes through. Okay, that's one thing I know about Petroffs that is unique to them. Does it make this part of their instrument sound better? Subjective at best. As a performing on the two Petroffs that I've played, the one consistency that I found, and I guess I'll include the little noodling that I've done when I try out instruments at piano dealers, they all seem to have a very heavy and slow action. I don't know if that's a design thing, and they try to appeal to people that like that, or if it's purely how the technicians on those instruments have worked the pianos. It is a little interesting that every Petroff I've played has felt like that. It's felt like it takes a lot of work to play forte and to play fast at high velocity, but they're very easy to control, mezzo piano and down. I can't speak more about that. That's just my experience. And the tone is pleasantly European. So we've talked a little bit about tone of pianos on the streams before, and different regions of the world, the piano manufacturers from different regions generally impart different tone into their instrument. And I think some of that has to do with the design, but also some of it has to do with the materials that are available in different parts of the world to build instruments with. And so I would say it has a tone somewhere between a Schimmel and a Bösendorfer. Schimmel to me tends to be kind of simple, not in a bad way. It's just, it's a very, very pure tone. It sounds, I think Schimmels play Mozart and Bach and early classical, or maybe early Beethoven. They can play those very, very, very well. Bösendorfer tone is a little bit more complex. There are more colors. And I feel like Petrov falls somewhere in between those. That's probably all I have about Petrov, Antonio. So for those of you, Antonio had mentioned in an email to me that he had a chance to play a Petrov concert grand. And I think you just got to noodle around on it for quite a while. And you had a great experience. Antonio, if you could share in the chat, do you have a number one takeaway from playing an instrument like that? Do you have another concert grand to kind of compare it to yourself? But what was that experience like for you? I think that would be an interesting thing to share with everybody. Let me see. Let's give Antonio a minute, and then I'm going to jump into Bethany's question. Or maybe, see, Alexis wrote first about the fantasy impromptu. Well, if Antonio, I'm going to jump forward, Antonio, but we'll circle back, because if you're typing a whole lot of stuff, I'm sure that, there it comes. There it comes. Antonio, you said you had about 20 minutes to play the instrument. It sounded magical compared to the Steinway D. The action was fantastic, and it was a new instrument, and it's their top model that they make. That sounds like a really great experience. Yeah. One of these days, I think any of you that wanted to, you could probably do this. There's a trade show called the NAMM Show. It's NAMM. I think it stands for the National Association of Music Merchants. And piano manufacturers show up with all sorts of instruments. The last one just happened maybe a month ago, a little less than a month ago, in Anaheim, California. Every January, there's a show in Anaheim, California, and I believe you can get tickets to go, and you can go and experience all sorts of stuff that might be very difficult to find near you otherwise, if you can get to Anaheim. And then there is a second show that most piano dealers do not take part in, that's in Nashville, I believe in the summertime. And there's also a show in Germany. I'm not sure which city. But these are kind of staggered throughout the year. So if you aren't in the US, but you can make it to Germany, I do know of another show where you might be able to go and try out, it's very difficult to have an opportunity to say, like, play a Petrov concert grand, and then play a Shigeru Kawai concert grand, and play a Steinway concert grand, and play a Mason and Hamlin. And if you can make it to the NAMM show, you can literally walk across a room and play each of those instruments and have an experience doing that. So yeah, Nancy, keep that in mind for next time. And anybody else that wants to go and try things out. Once in a while, I make an appearance and I hang out with the folks at Mason and Hamlin and play their instruments. But I haven't been to one of those shows since 2020. It was the January right before COVID happened in the U.S. So, yes, Calais in Anaheim. Conferences for piano players. You should ask your teacher, Calais, if she's a part of the State Music Teachers Association in California, and she'll be able to know if there are events for students and for teachers, if there are things open to the public, because it's the association is called MTNA, and MTNA has a national association, but they also have sub-state chapters. And the state chapters put together all kinds of things. There are even chapters beneath state that pertain to specific cities. And that would be something, if you could get plugged into that via your teacher, that would be a great opportunity to explore events near you. There might be master classes that are open to the public to just go hear. And if your teacher is a part of that association, then there would be subsequent opportunities for you to possibly partake in the events as well, if there was something that would interest you. So, absolutely. Okay. Let's go back to Alexis's question. You're having trouble getting fluidity on bars 13 through 20 of Chopin's Fantasy Impromptu. Okay. Well, let's see what we can come up with, Alexis. Fluidity is a good description. Are there points in your practice? Do you feel like the hand is getting tired? Do you feel like your hand is getting blocked? Like you can play a pattern or a group of notes, but then you can't get to the next one fast enough? Or in trying to get to the next one, we tense up? Do you have any more description about what that lack of fluidity and how it feels, other than it's not fluid enough? I need to plug my iPad back in, and then I can show everybody the score and a little bit of the notes we're talking about. Okay, great. You say toward the end of that section, your forearm starts feeling a little tense. Okay. Here's some of the Fantasy Impromptu. And we're looking at measures 13, which starts here, through 18, 19, 20. I guess the end of the page. Okay, so I will be sight reading this because I've not played this in a very, very long time. Okay, right. Alexis, my biggest suggestions to you, if you're not doing this already, is to practice a variety of groupings. I feel like I mentioned this practice method to you a lot. So the first and the most obvious grouping is going to be from the accented pitch in measure 13. So and through each of these groupings, I'm playing as fast as I can with good articulation. If you can and you want to add a bass note, we can mark the bass a little bit so that we have a foundation to play over. Okay, and let me show you a little bit of what that's actually looking like in my arm. So starting from the side first, I'm making sure that as I play through each of these groups, that I'm doing all of the rotation necessary, really for every one of these pitches. 1 to 5 to 2 to 3. And then a rest. Same thing again. So it feels like a little shake for every group. Okay. That's how I would start practicing. Then, can you shift the groupings around? And have you shifted them around if you've already done this? So, so I've now shifted, and I'll show on the page. We started by playing a grouping that began on the first note of each of these slurred patterns, right? This second grouping, I'll even draw it underneath. So we had one grouping like that. The second grouping began here and went subsequently to the next note beyond. So they're still 4 notes long. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, but in each of these pauses, we're giving ourselves an opportunity to relax the hand, but also work the fingers at the tempo they need to work to play the passage at performance tempo, right? Because this is a passage in 16ths, we have 4 iterations of groupings that we can create, and they're all going to present a different challenge for the hand. So we could pause on the third note in the group, which would be in blue here. At the jump in the bar, we're going to find that where the bar changes, that feels very difficult to make that jump. That would be a spot to work on. So as I'm doing that, I'm learning more and more about how I can prepare the hand to still make this transition from 3 to 1 across an octave, but do it in a healthy and relaxed way and still practice it as fast as performance tempo, or maybe faster. Okay, and then we'd have the fourth grouping, which would start on the final note in green. Yes. Okay. Alexis, have you done work like this with these types of groupings? Because if you haven't, this would absolutely be the first place to start. And take it one beat at a time, just like we've done, one beat at a time. And make sure that every 4, okay, so you've done groupings, but not a wide variety. Every 4 16th notes, the hand gets a rest and gets to come back to a relaxed state. That is a really important and a great tool to learn how to play passages like this that are really repetitive, as long as you're not trying to do all of that practice and groupings with the wrong technique, which would be, in this case, only fingers. So don't do it that way, but use the rotation and the little shake. Okay. You can then create longer groupings by saying, let's put 2 beats together. Okay. And once that is comfortable, you can create even longer groupings and say, I'm going to play the whole bar and then rest and rest. So even though I have not played these notes in a lifetime, because I'm already doing practicing here in these small groupings, it's already becoming more and more and more fluent. And that's not too bad for 5 minutes of practice or less. Because of how powerful working in groupings is. Okay, secondarily, try practicing this whole passage instead of forte as marked, and instead of with any accents, practice this all detached or staccato and piano. So if we clear all of that, we're going to say forget that forte is a thing. Practice it piano. Think leggero or lightly. And we could add just little staccato marks for each one. But we don't want these to be extraordinarily short staccati. Just and let the tempo slow down to a point where that is comfortable to play. Notice, and if I go back to full screen, notice that I'm still, even though I'm playing with staccato articulation, I'm still incorporating little bits of rotation here. Yes? Practicing this staccato is going to help. It's going to help train the fingers to do a little bit more of that work rather than just relying on rotation, because we can't rely on one or the other. We need both of these things to work together for us. And it's also going to remind us that at this speed, the speed that this passage is, even though it's marked forte, most of our playing is really, it's not going to feel like it's that strong and that digging in. The accented note might maybe like that. Right? But the other three notes in each of the passages, if this is the accent, these are quite light. So we can train the hand to do that by playing the whole passage lightly and going nice and slowly. Okay, great practicing also comes in opposites. So because we've practiced piano and staccato, let's also practice forte. And this time, let's actually omit all of the rotation. So we're practicing in a variety of different ways, and they're all working a different part of our technique, a different part of the mechanism. So forte, still legato this time. Finger legato, no pedal. Yes? The goal of all of these different types of practice is that this passage, we work technique in so many different ways that everything that the passage requires becomes easy. The biggest key to playing this, I think, is the rotation, and it's just so much a part of how we have to use the hand to play the initial octave. Right? Now, if you find that, you get through the first 4 bars where I just played, and the accent changes in measure 17, and it changes to the upper note. So it goes from the thumb to the best grouping to practice from measure 17 to the end of the page is going to be the one that pauses on yes, the one that pauses on the accented pitch. Alexis, yeah, so you asked, can you elaborate on the no wrist rotation for practicing forte and legato? We want to be sure that in so many of our efforts and routines in practicing this passage, so many of them revolve around the use of rotation. And they do because it's such an important component of the piece. But we don't want to neglect how active the fingers truly need to be to play this really well. So if we're only playing with rotation, And what can happen if we do too much rotational only practice is that our fingers can tend to get a little lazy. They sound a little flabby. They're not very articulate. There's not a lot of life and spark in each pitch. There might be on the large rotations, but then not in the middle. And it might feel very comfortable to play like that, and we can really let the fingers go. In fact, depending on where you are with your rotational study, if I had a student that had a lot of trouble making the rotation happen, and their tendency was to play with too much finger-only activity, I would probably, for a short time, maybe a week, ask them to play this with only rotation, because we want to over-exaggerate that. But if we're approaching this in a really balanced way, we're going to say rotation is really important, but also practicing in a way that emphasizes each of the fingers' individual jobs is also really important. And that is the forte, legato. And what we're doing as we do that really well is we're still using the wrist. We're not rotating like this anymore, but we're using the wrist to move the hand. But all of the playing, which you can't really see from the top down, all of the playing is really coming from the bridge and down into the instrument. And by playing forte, we're assuring ourselves that we're truly making a large enough motion that the fingers are getting engaged, right? I said earlier about practicing in opposites, and great practicing works in opposites. Opposite speed, opposite dynamic, opposite types of technique, rotation versus none, and finger articulation only. I had a big point I was going to make. I was so excited to make it. I'm sorry, Noteworthy, to see you go, but enjoy. Let me see if it comes back to me. Opposite practicing. It fills in the gaps of what our technique may be naturally missing. Or it fills in the gaps of the way that we may have excessively practiced. Even if you have a very, very highly developed technique, it's still really valuable to practice in opposite ways, because it reminds us just all of the components necessary to play a certain passage with a lot of life and sparkle articulation. And when we use all of that technique together, it's going to be fairly effortless. If something's missing, it's not going to be effortless. So in a balanced approach to practice, we're going to cover a variety of different ways of approaching that, because I can't see what you're actually doing. But if we were leaning one way or the other, most of our practice time would go to the opposite technique of what we're already able to achieve really well. So if you have spent a lot of time practicing the rotation and doing repetition after repetition, feeling all of this, and even at a variety of speeds, right? Maybe that's really not the practice that we need the most of. Maybe we need to use a little bit more finger, and maybe we're trying to do too much with rotation. The ironic part of this equation is that both an excess of rotation at speed or an excess of finger-only movement at speed can both cause a very similar feeling in the upper part of the forearm, and that's that sense of tiredness and that sense of burning. They're close to feeling the same. The finger-only is kind of, it's more centralized in a very specific place in the top of the forearm up here. And the rotation is more generalized across the entire arm and the muscles, a little bit on top and a little bit on the bottom. So if you're not acutely aware of what those two sensations feel like, they can actually almost feel like the same thing. The more you learn about that, the more you know which type of practice you're missing. But I hope that answers your question, Alexis. I would give all of those different ways of practicing a try and intersperse them. I wouldn't spend too long doing one particular thing. Do some groupings, 5 minutes. Do some forte finger work, 5 minutes maybe. And you'll start to see over the course of your practice which one is becoming the most helpful. You might find when you attempt this passage again, that something after one of those particular exercises, it feels better. And it might not stay better. It might feel better for 1 repetition or 2 repetitions without doing that type of practice. And then your body will want to go back to how you've played it before because it hasn't learned the new movements fully enough yet. But when you can start to pick up on the last type of repetition I did was, which grouping was it? Or which finger activity was it? That one might be the biggest key for you in your practice to continue to propel the phrase further. Lovely question, Alexis. Thanks, Becky, and thanks, Rob. Okay, we have to jump back to Bethany. Any tips for even trills or tremolos? Okay. Bethany, I definitely do not have that music. You mentioned a Ravel piece. I definitely don't. I don't even think I have that in my library, my paper library, let alone on my iPad. This is going to sound similar to what I just mentioned to Alexis, but great tremolos very often feel like just a shake in the hand, especially if they're just an octave. But even so, even if there are, let's say, even if there are pitches in between the tremolo, but especially if it's an octave, it should just feel like a shake. Stay close to the keys, Bethany. Also in Ravel and most other contemporary composers and romantic composers, the tremolo is not measured, which I'm sure you know. But because of that, especially if there's other things going on with the other hand, if every single pitch doesn't come out, it's not the end of the world. So slow down your tremolo so that you can shake. It's really, again, forearm rotation. And I'm trying to play it very quietly. If you attempt a medium dynamic mezzo piano, mezzo forte, slow down to a speed where all of those notes are speaking. If we're doing enough of this shake, and there's just enough movement laterally with the wrist, we can continue this at a moderate speed and a moderate dynamic forever. It should take so little muscle effort or muscle engagement, if we're doing it right, that just like a good trill, we should be able to play it for minutes and minutes and minutes on end. So forearm rotation, stay close to the keys, slow down, medium dynamic, and don't be worried about every single note coming out or not. Tremolo is usually, when it's not in classical period repertoire, It's usually there for an effect of some kind, perhaps some sort of orchestral effect. It could be strings tremoloing. And especially when there's something else going on, all we want to hear is that texture. We don't really want to hear this, which would be like a classical period or a Beethovenian tremolo, right? It's not supposed to be pokey, and it's not supposed to be, every note shouldn't be that articulate and that present. We just want it to create an atmosphere. So, okay, now you asked about trills also. Bethany, have you tried a variety of different fingers on the trills? And so let's see, G sharp. This is about the tremolo. It must be, Bethany. You said G sharp, E. I picked a G sharp. That's crazy. G sharp and E together with. Oh, so it's not even octave. It's G sharp and E with the F natural above the E. Or is it like this? Oh. Bethany, you said it almost feels like a 4/5 trill. Can you change your fingering to be 1/3/4 instead of 1/4/5? Or even 1/3/5? We want to expand the fulcrum, where the fulcrum is happening in the hand, so that if we don't have to use 4/5, 4/5 is really going to be difficult to work between. So can we use 3/4? Or maybe it's up this octave. Or can we use 3/5? 3/5 feels so much easier than the other two. I mean, exponentially easier than a 4/5 tremolo. It's possible, but that'll take a lot of practice, Bethany. If you have the fingers available, and it's less than an octave, so I think you can reach this. 1, 3, 5. Right. To show everybody else what's going on. So we have 1 on G sharp, 3 on E, kind of tucked in between the black keys, 5 on F, and then our point of pivoting really becomes between the 3rd finger and the 5th finger, which is a much bigger point to rotate around than if it's 4/5. There's almost no fulcrum between 4 and 5. So that isn't always possible. In some repertoire, you have to use 4/5, and then it just takes an extreme amount of practice. There are some list etudes where you have to trill with 4 and 5, and you play a melody with the thumb, and they just take a lot of work. And you can't even always be using rotation to do it as well, because sometimes it impacts the phrase we're able to make with the thumb side of the hand. But that's a subject for a different day. Lucas, since you have this is a related question, and welcome, Lucas, by the way. You say, what about trills, long trills in Baroque pieces? And some scores disassemble the trills into regular notes, and some teachers leave the trills to feeling. Lucas, what repertoire are you playing, and what repertoire have you played? I'm really asking because I'm looking for how long have you played before I give an answer, and the kind of repertoire you've experienced, because it'll be different. Bach inventions. Is this your first dive into Bach, let's say serious Bach music? Have you played other Bach in the past? The inventions are usually one of the first places, unless you played maybe, the famous C major prelude, maybe a couple preludes from the Well-Tempered Clavier. Okay, Lucas, you say first time. At the beginning of Bach's study, I would measure your trills and use a shorter duration, so a shorter number of repetitions, and play them precisely at whether it should be a 16th note or 32nd note trill is slightly dependent on the context and the speed of the piece that you're working on. But I would absolutely measure them so they get a very precise rhythm. And as you become a more experienced Bach player, we'll start to move out of that and the trills will be more free. But right now, trills in Bach are mostly ornamentation, and they're meant to expand upon the feeling of a particular note. But what's most important is that you start to understand the role that in the inventions, the two voices have to play with one another and how they're interchanging musically. That is much more important than a phenomenal execution of the trill or the trills or the turns or the mordents or whatever they happen to be. Those should take less priority right now. And as you experience more and more Bach, they'll gain more and more priority. And we'll also learn that there are places in Bach where you can add ornamentation that isn't given in the score. You mentioned the inventions. And it seems like you have at least 2 editions. What editions are you playing from, Lucas? I'm getting my 2 favorites ready to go while you answer that. While that's open, especially anybody else that's played Bach, do you have editions that you have worked from? And what have your favorites been? Okay, that's okay, Lucas. That's okay. Luckily, the two that are really, really great to use for Bach. But Lucas, do you have a teacher, or are you studying on your own? Because of course, a teacher can help you out if you have a more blank canvas type of score. Since nobody else, I don't think, is jumping in. You know, a lot of times Henley gets recommended for Bach or Reiter. Those two are very often recommended, and they're considered urtext editions. So you get what's printed in the score as well as in the manuscript. There's a lot of tradition and interpretive markings that are missing in urtext because you're given the blank slate that Bach wrote. Because of that, they're really valuable. But if you're trying to use an urtext edition and you're trying to learn Bach on your own and without a teacher, that can be a very difficult thing to do because none of the performance practice from the period is given to you in the edition. And there are no editorial suggestions, maybe fingering, but other than that, there are no editorial suggestions of how to play. So Henley and Reiter are, if you're working on your own, I think they're wonderful for professionals or really, really high-level students. If you're working with a teacher, that can be wonderful because your teacher can help give you all that information as you go through and work on a piece of music. And then you can also have a discussion about, well, what direction do I want to choose something? Do I want to play a certain phrase with this articulation or this other articulation? And there will be valid reasons for 2 or 3 or 4 choices in your interpretation. And when you have that blank slate, you can make those choices. But let's see, Nathaniel, you say you haven't bought Henley Inventions. You have bought Henley Inventions, but you haven't started them yet. You played a lot of little preludes from Henley. Yes. Okay. So for those of you that are learning Bach and you want some more suggestions, especially if you're learning on your own, my favorite, and it's available for free on IMSLP, imslp.org. My favorite is this edition. These are all of the Bach inventions edited by Busoni. Only edited. He didn't rewrite any of the pitches. But if you just take a look at, let's just take a look at the first page. There is so much information here that would not be in an urtext edition. So from the slurs that are everywhere, that many of these would not have been Bach's slurs, we definitely wouldn't have staccato markings. Oh, like this. Oh, come on. There we go. Like those. And here, nor would we have accents, nor would we have dynamic marks. Accent, dynamic marks, dynamics, more dynamics. We wouldn't have any of that given in an urtext edition. Also, wouldn't have even a tempo given, or any other direction. Busoni was such an expert in playing Bach and also in transcribing Bach for piano. I really like and trust his editions within the edition. So I gravitate toward teaching from Busoni, especially inventions, because they're so early on for most students to play. The other, I don't know if I have the, maybe, do I? Oh, I don't for the inventions on here. But, okay. These editions would also be available. These are the 3-part inventions, or the sinfonias, edited by, that's this little name in parentheses, Mugellini. A little different than Busoni, the Busoni editions. They have a lot in common. Fingering choices are going to be a little different. Some of the ornamentation will be different, and some of the slurs and dynamics will be slightly different. But this would also be a wonderful resource. So this is a different piece, but you can see here as well, we still have all kinds of slurs, dynamics marked. Even here, oh, this is really pertains to what we were just talking about. Bach would have given us that little trill symbol, and here we have a fully written out example of what that could sound like. And that's a very good one. Okay. Yeah, so if you are looking for editions to learn Bach from, especially if you don't have a teacher, those 2 editors, and usually you can find them for free on IMSLP as a download because they're in the public domain. And if you want to, study with one of those and study with a Henley edition side by side. And then you could even maybe do a little bit of mixing and matching from the 2. But the more you understand, oh, and gosh, I mean, they have so many footnotes about, there's so much, and there's so much analysis in here. And, oh, they're just wonderful. Yeah. So Busoni from me is my primary recommendation, and second would be Mugellini. Okay. Okay, great. Cool. I am going back up the chat to look for the next question. Noteworthy. Let's see. Noteworthy had to run. But she had a question. And it's about a Chopin waltz, but it's about really playing repeated sections. So I'm going to answer it somewhat quickly, and we'll continue to move on from there. So she says, you play one section perfectly, and in the repeated section, you fall apart. Any ideas, and why is Chopin so hard? The first place I would talk about is focus during a repeated section, especially with the order in which you've listed how things are happening. When the first time goes really well and the second time does not, we have lost focus, or we don't have enough focus to play it well the second time. That could be anything from a feeling like we got through it once and we're somewhat relieved when we finish playing it, even subconsciously without being aware. And then when we start the repeat, we just 5 or 10% of our focus is missing, and then we make mistakes. So where we have a repeat, we can try to learn to super focus on the second time, especially if the first one's always going well. And it's interesting that that happens, because I think more often than not, the problem would be vice versa, where when we're given the opportunity to repeat a section, the first time will be the one that doesn't go as well, and the second time will go better because we just had an opportunity to practice it the first time around. So in a performance, or when we're running through the piece, it's like we get a practice run, and then we can play it better after we've practiced it. And that is a whole different problem. And that is a problem with how we've spent our time practicing, not with focus. So I'll leave that one there, especially since Noteworthy isn't here presently. Okay. Dith, you say you're learning some Beethoven Bagatelle Opus 119, number 4, for your next RCM exam. Great. Oh gosh, Dith, you're asking a very specific question. Let me see if I have that opus on my bookshelf, because you're asking about avoiding pedaling in certain measures. And I know I don't have, I do not have the Beethoven Bagatelles on my iPad. No, I don't. I wish I had a way of putting some like music on while I go and scour my bookshelf, but give me, it'll be 30 seconds, I promise. Okay. Do I have Opus 119? Yes. So I apologize, I won't be able to put these selections up on screen for everybody. Here's number 4. Okay, so Dith, you said Opus 119, number 4, and avoiding pedaling in measures 3, 7, doing staccato on 16th note pairs. Okay. And you say it sounds kind of strange to you. Okay, let's see. So that is the first 8 bars. We didn't get any 16ths in there, but so, okay, you say avoid pedaling in measures 3. So here's measure 1. I'm calling this measure 1, even though it's a half bar. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not what the score indicates. So we'll call this 0, and then 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so you say avoid pedaling in measures 3. Okay, Dith, if you were my student, I would not advise you, I guess that's measure 2, but here, let me clarify something. Are you allowed to put pedaling in measure 2? Because this, really, I would not advise anyone. Oh, gosh. I would throw a tiny bit of pedaling in that particular phrase myself to help alleviate some of the really awkward stretch between three and 4. Let's see. You say if 2 is the one with the G natural on beat 1. Okay, no, that is measure 2. So it's not that measure, but the measure after. So here we have a scale in tenths. And there I completely agree with your teacher. No pedaling. Any amount of pedaling is going to really blur this scale. Yeah. So I agree with that one. And then you say measure 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Here. Yeah. Goodness. I would also agree with your teacher about that. You said measure 3, but you meant measure 2. Okay. So if it's about this passage in sixths, personally, I would probably pedal that twice. I would pedal the first 2, second 2. Maybe not exactly, but I would be pedaling to allow a different fingering than at least what's suggested in my score, which is 5, 4, 3, 4, 5, and on the bottom 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, which leads to this very wide stretch, and playing fully finger legato both voices, the upper voice and the lower voice. That feels excessively tense, and there's no way around it. There's nothing, I don't think there's anything that says that we have to play it quite that cleanly. Here, yes. Use finger sustain, and then I would pedal to show a movement of 5-1, 5-2, and then I'd let go of the pedal. So I'd connect these with pedal and let go, and then pedal so that I can reach the octave. So I'm using pedal to connect 5-5, 5-5. I did finger substitution that time. Yeah, 5-5. And that's how I would pedal that measure. In a way that still gives us the clarity of the two voices, soprano, alto. But that doesn't require the hand to play with everything fully extended. I mean, that seems like, especially at if you don't have a great grasp on how to let go of the fingers, that's a recipe for setting up the next bar to not be played very well. When we need the hand to collapse again, not collapse, retract, and play nice and evenly in a beautiful line. Now, I don't want to... You could try this out, Dith. I don't love disagreeing with any teachers, because there is still merit to exploring and understanding that those are two phrases and they need to be fully connected. And perhaps your teacher might have a better idea about how skillful your current use of the pedal is. Pedaling 1/8 note and then another eighth note at the end of that phrase in places that are not on the beat and in ways that do not pertain to the change in harmony. That's a very advanced skill. It's worth knowing. It's worth practicing. And if you were my student, we would approach the phrase that way, and we'd work on that sort of advanced pedaling rather than the extreme stretch in the hand that I don't love. Did you have another question about these bars, or about this piece? You said a staccato across 16ths, so perhaps... You were saying staccato across 16th notes, right? Okay. My score, this is Henley, so it's got Beethoven's markings in it. These are slurred. And I wouldn't break those, I wouldn't play everything slurred because that's not what Beethoven wrote. However, when you need to show the separation between each two-note pair that is slurred together on the score, it might be a very viable suggestion to play the second note and feel it staccato, because we don't want... That isn't what Beethoven wrote either, right? It's not one phrase. It's... Yeah. Oh, yeah. Dith, no, you can't play him in 4. Sorry. You got to follow Beethoven's marks. It's also what gives this movement just a hint of being slightly more dance-like. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Dith. That one you have to do. Seth, you said when you end up releasing the pedal very quickly when doing... Do you end up releasing the pedal very quickly when doing something like this? Yes. And in fact, the part I was talking about earlier... Yes. And even... I might even only be approximately half pedaling or 3/4 pedaling the beginning. So there's connection, but I'm only, it sounds like a 3/4 pedal, but actually my foot on the pedal is only going down 10% of the way. Hey, Roadsy. The Traveler, Roadsy the Traveler. So yeah, Seth, I would be pedaling that with a partial pedal, enough that auditorily we hear the connection, but not a full pedal where it's going to take a lot of time to, if I do a full pedal, if you are listening really closely, you can hear the dampers working with what I just did, because I have to move too great of a distance too quickly, and I can't do it in a subtle way. So this will apply to all of you that have an acoustic instrument. Possibly if you have a digital that can do some half pedaling. It's hard to feel where that point is of half pedal. But if you can find that partial depression of the pedal just enough, so right there, and you can hear the notes linger just that little bit, and I'm not going to play it staccato, but just for the sake of showing what the pedal's currently doing, there's a tiny bit of sustain. And then if I go bum, and the release then of the pedal is, it feels microscopic. It feels like this tiniest little movement I do with the foot that cleans up the phrase, so it's totally, you can't tell that the pedal even got used at all. Webster. Hello, Webster. I do. It's been a while. Okay. Great. Let's put Beethoven away for a little bit. And Alexis, if you're still here, I'm seeing your second question. You need to pick a grade 8 rock piece. Alexis, do you have a list to choose from? I hope you do. For example, like ABRSM gives only a handful of suggestions of pop piano to play, and they're very specific arrangements. I am not familiar with, you're using an IG abbreviation. I'm not familiar with that system, so I don't know, but I would think that there would be some sort of suggestions, and I wouldn't depart from what those are. Ellen, you say Christmas Time Is Here by Vince Guaraldi is RCM 8. That's great. Alexis, I'm not sure Alexis's level, or if it's RCM, or if it's another system. And level 8 in a variety of systems, they don't mean the same thing. So, Alexis, I can't, I really can't give you a more specific recommendation, because if it's a rock piano arrangement, those are all over the map in terms of difficulty and what they're going to teach you. And I would really want to see a list from the specific resource that you're using. Beyond that, hopefully it's a short one, and hopefully there's only maybe 5 recommendations or 10. And pick one that you enjoy the most. And if you can find on YouTube, go on YouTube and look up performances of that specific arrangement. And if you can find those, that will help you narrow down your selection a little bit. Yeah. You say, oh, in your next comment, you said you want to play Rather Be by Clean Bandit. That's a great song. But again, the arrangement's going to make a lot of... If that's available at your level, awesome. Okay. Let's see. I think we're getting through the chat. Oh, yeah. Oh, Alexis had to go. I just saw it. Minutes later, 10 minutes, 20 minutes later. Well, Alexis, this will be timestamped for you, so great. Nathaniel, I think, Nathaniel, you have the next question. If I missed any, drop them in the chat currently at the bottom, and we will go from there. So, Nathaniel, you said you've started on a Grieg, the Arietta, and it's the first piece that you're working on with a lot of attention on 2 voices in the same hand. And any tips? That is also a piece I do not have on my iPad or on my bookshelf. But anything with multiple voices, Bach included, but really anything with multiple voices, work on each voice separately, and together. I wouldn't spend an enormous amount of time perfecting playing the voices apart from one another, but I would work all 3 ways simultaneously in a practice session. So if we'll call them a soprano and alto voice, since they're in the right hand, I would work soprano voice first, actually work them together and make sure that you know all of the fingers that you're going to use on all of the pitches for both voices that are going to have to be used simultaneously. If you need to mark them all so that you remember them, because the next step, we're going to remove one voice, and we'll say practice the soprano voice only. But don't practice the soprano voice using any fingers you want to make the phrase easier to play. Practice it only with the fingering that you are going to perform when you need to play both voices. then do the subsequent thing for the alto voice. So we're still practicing each voice with the correct fingering, but doing them one at a time. That one at a time isn't to further solidify any of our physical movement at the instrument. It is so that we listen and learn what exactly the counterpoint, and we know exactly what each voice is doing. Where is it having a more important moment? Where is it saying something bigger emotionally? Where is the other one more complementary? Are there points where two voices are duetting together and they're working as one? We want to find all of those and learn how to bring them out individually first. And then, when we've trained our ears to do that, can we go back and put voices together, soprano, alto in one hand, and still execute those changes in phrase and all the shapes we're trying to make? Nathaniel, you said, when joining them together, exaggerate. I'm assuming that means piano versus forte. That depends on the context. I wouldn't make one voice always louder than the other, because there are going to be different points when one needs to be brought out. Would I exaggerate those points within how the voices relate to one another? Yes. Especially at the beginning of learning, exaggerate which voice comes out and which voice gets tucked away. You say it's really playing the melody with the pinky and broken chords in the middle voice. Okay, that's less. Let me. Oh, give me a second. I'll see if I can find this. Especially because I think this is the last question in the chat. Maybe Dith had one, but let's see. Okay. I see what you mean. This is less soprano versus alto voice and more, it's very similar to the structure of Schumann's Foreign Lands and People, if people in the chat know that. So we have a bass that's it's relatively inactive. It does a lot of sitting and sustaining. We have a middle voice that's joined between the two hands. Like this. And then a soprano voice. I think I got the majority of those notes right to show you what's going on. Nathaniel, in this case, I would be bringing out very much the top line and subduing the most the inner line. All of this. That's really just a texture that we're creating, but we want to hear the top line. That's the line doing all of the singing. Yeah. So that is a little different. It's somewhat like two voices, but I'd call it bass, accompanimental texture, and soprano. And when the bass line starts to move, and doing this, that can get a little bit more attention. But mostly your attention in this piece is going to be on the very, very top. This piece is the Arietta by Grieg. It's Opus 12, number 1. It's from Lyric Pieces, Opus 12. Okay. Yeah. Nathaniel, I hope that helps. Webster, you said your performance of Rock 3 went well. That's great to hear. Very, very great to hear. I'm glad. I hope it was a lot of fun and just an exhilarating performance for you and for the audience as well. Dith, you said RCM says not to follow repeat signs during exams to save time. Yes, given that, would you recommend obeying repeat signs during the learning process or avoiding them? Dith, I would avoid them. If you really enjoy a piece that you've worked on for an exam and you want to continue playing it after the exam is over, then you can start to obey the repeats and start to show more variation and do more with the piece that way. And you can still use it as a learning tool. But especially if you get nervous at all about performing, I would recommend that you stick to in your practice exactly what you're going to do during the exam. We don't want to change that at all. The same thing goes if, even at a higher level, let's say collegiate juries. So a jury is what happens at the end of your semester. It's like your final exam for performance. And semesters that you're studying that you don't have a full-length recital program to play, you still have to give a jury. And it's still memorized. It's still relatively long. It might be 20 or 30 minutes instead of 60 or 80, depending on the level that you're studying. So in juries, you're always expected to omit repeats because there's not a lot of time. The faculty is sitting in the concert hall 10 or 12 hours hearing music from the students all day long for a week straight. They're not interested in hearing you do something special with a repeat in a jury performance. They're interested in hearing the repertoire you've studied, what you've learned, showing a variety of styles, and making sure that you're on the path that you need to be to continue on. The following semester, when you have to give a recital performance, you will obey all the repeats. So if you're doing any of the same repertoire, your practicing for that will change. But as you're preparing for one of those, just omit the repeats and don't practice those, because we want the situation where we feel under pressure to be the same as what we've practiced. And you say you've been following the repeats with the Chopin A minor waltz. Okay, well, start practicing, Dith, not showing them. Yeah, if they don't want you to do it, don't do it in the exam, and learn how to make the piece still work very nicely and in a well-conceived and constructed way without showing those two repeats. That might mean some of what you do changes. So how you approach... For example, since you're only going to go through this once... I'm just playing it by ear, sorry. Because you're only going to do that once, you're only going to have one opportunity to show something special there. So don't delay what you might want to show in your second repeat. Do it in the first one, and then work backwards from there. If you go backwards, and when we go backwards through the piece, right before that, you're offering a repeat already because it's written out in the score, there's a repeat of the main theme. So that's going to be different, and then how you play that section, because you're only going to have one time, that's going to be different. So I'm going from one of the more climactic moments of that piece, where we're in the dominant, and we are just one of the brief moments, glimpses of happiness. and figuring out how we want to play that and then work outward from there. Webster, that sounds really, really awesome. So glad. And I trust the orchestra was very good. Webster was talking about playing the Rachmaninoff Third Concerto. Yeah. Hopefully the orchestra got into it too, because it's such a phenomenal piece. Okay. Antonio, I do not know that pianist. I don't even think I'm going to try to pronounce that name live. I would rather have a moment to practice it. I don't. So send me an email. I'll take a listen to Irvin. Foo Fighter, welcome. You are asking for tips on some Satie. Let's see if I have that on my iPad. I do. Okay. And Webster, he said the orchestra wasn't good. Okay. Well, it sounds like you'll have a follow-up, so that's great. Okay, Foo Fighter, you said you've done 1 and 3 of the Nyosen. And you're working on number 2. That is, yeah, some very interesting harmony there. Okay. I think, especially because you've played the others, you're already familiar with this. Well, 2 of the others. You're already familiar with this style. So without hearing you play, I would say first make sure that the left hand is. It's like, well, we know this is from France, so I'm thinking of just a cafe, nighttime bistro, sitting out on the street. And the left hand is like cigarette smoke, just wafting through the air. It's there. We can just perceive it. But it's very amorphous. It's there and it's gone. If we can continue to make the left hand feel that way without too much emphasis, I would really focus on that. Ethereal, I love that word. Yeah. So keep that sort of feeling and make sure that nothing in the left hand accidentally gets brought out. If you're going to bring out some of the changes in the bass, like where E happens in the 3rd bar, so 1, 2. It can have just a little bit more ring, a little bit like a bell-like ring, but it shouldn't be much different than where we've come from. And it's just a hair more dynamic. And I would also say try not to be too romantic with the melody. So the melody is also, it's just floating. And as I'm sight reading this, I'm doing more play with the time and rubato than I would really want to if I were. I would keep it pretty straightforward. And I think that will be in service of the music and in service of what Satie wants. And do more with the dynamics that are shown and not with rubato in particular. Nancy, you say you have the Schirmer edition of these. There are no bars and there's no time signature. Yeah. I am not reading off of an edition like that. I'm reading off of one that's more notated in a modern way. But that the fact that there were no measures lends itself to this idea that this music is just floating and it's just existing in space. It's very ambient. And we don't want the sense of, time signatures inherently carry emphasis in pulse, and we don't want that. So, Foo Fighter, I hope that was helpful, just as a couple brief and general suggestions for you. If you ever wanted to send in yourself playing the piece, I don't know if you were here at the beginning of today, but I always start sessions if we've got a submission with viewers sending in videos of playing. We have a little masterclass. So if you'd ever like to send in your playing, feel free to. There's information on how to do that in the description down below this video. Yeah, okay. Absolutely, Foo Fighter. That's great. Let's see. Oh my goodness. Are we through all of the... Okay, if I missed something, please let me know. Did I miss any questions from anybody? I don't mean to. But I'm not seeing any come up. So, let me know. We've got time for one more if somebody has one more question. Or we can call it a day today. Either one. It's been a good session. I got so into talking about the Chopin earlier that I'm feeling actually a little tired. Well, I'll give us another minute or so and see if there's one more question that comes in, or if I missed something, and I did, please just drop it in the current chat at the very bottom. And otherwise, yeah. We're going to be back on, with these streams, we're going to be back on more of a regular schedule for, well, at least for the next 2 months. So for the next 2 months, these are going to be every other week. So remember, these streams are always the 2nd and the 4th Wednesday of the month. So our next one's going to be the 26th of February. They're always at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. I always post a link to these at least a day prior to the stream happening, so that if you go on that link when it's posted, you can always find out what time that's going to be local to you. 10 a.m. for me, Mountain Time, USA. So that's 2 hours behind Eastern Time, USA. I want to say 7 or 8 hours behind UTC. And that might change across the year. So always check the screen, and you can find out what time local for you the day before the stream happens. And Mia, okay, we will take your question and finish up today with yours. Mia says, can you recommend a PDF I can get with actual music and not exercises for sight reading practice, beginner, intermediate? Mia, I have a new suggestion that I just learned about maybe a week or two ago. It's been around for a while, but I just learned about it. Bach Scholar, who has a YouTube channel, has a book of Bach chorales that I believe he has rewritten in a variety of sight reading examples that progress from grade to grade. And something like on each page, I don't have a copy of the PDF of the score, and you'd have to buy it. It's not available for free. But what I have seen looks fantastic. And so you get relatively short sight reading excerpts, like 8 bars, maybe 16 bars. And they are, it's great music because it's Bach, and it's simplified in a thoughtful and accurate way for each grade level. And then as you progress, you can also go back and revisit these same examples. And I think the book is pretty massive. But you can revisit the examples and then play the next grade level up. And there'll be more voices added or more rhythms added, or there'll be phrasing added or something like that. So they do start, I believe, grade 1, 2-ish, and then they go up through grade 10. And I think that they mean up RCM levels, grade 10. Those are sight reading excerpts that pertain to that grade, which is much easier than playing repertoire that pertains to that grade level, right? So that was my recommendation today of actual music to play that would be great for sight reading. Yeah. And Mia, the other thing you could do, depending on, Bedlington Groomer, let me answer that first. You said, what book is this? It is a book by Bach Scholar. That's his YouTube name. His first name is Corey. I can't remember his last name, but you could find his channel. Yeah, Nathaniel says Bach Scholar's book. There. Thanks, Nathaniel. And you could Google that. You could probably go on his YouTube channel and find information about it. And it is available in PDF form. Corey Hall. That's his last name, I think. I was, very pleasantly surprised when I found out about this maybe a week or 2 ago. And I think it's existed for much longer. Mia, I had one more thing to say, and that is if, depending on your grade level, if you said beginner to intermediate, so if that means you're playing, for example, RCM 3-4, approximately, you could go back up about 2 to 3 levels and look at the repertoire suggestions from RCM and use those as sight reading examples. So if you're playing grade 4 RCM, which is right on the border, I think, between beginner and intermediate, I think. And if you're playing that kind of repertoire, go back 2 or 3 levels, go to grade 1, grade 2. There'll be an entire list of repertoire that you can find. Some of them will be purchased, and some of them will be available for free, and you could probably find them again on imslp.org. And that's a fantastic resource because you'll get a huge list of dozens, sometimes hundreds of pieces via the RCM syllabus. And all you have to do is go backwards a few grade levels, and those should be challenging but doable sight reading examples to work through. So there ends up being kind of a never-ending supply of sight reading if you look at it from that perspective. Because there is, as you continue to progress, there is so much repertoire that you never got through, that we never got through from the earlier levels, that you can always go back and do a read through and use it as your sight reading for the day. Thanks, Kale. Thanks for sticking around this whole time. Oh, Nathaniel, the bar talk. Yeah, it is great sight reading. It's not the most pleasant, I don't think, to play, but it is great sight reading. And Mustafa, your question came in right when I was about to, when I was saying we were going to take one more. So I'll answer Mustafa's question also. You said, and then we're going to wrap up for today. You said you were 36, you've been practicing for 8 months, and you're practicing scales, but you feel frustrated, and you don't feel like practicing scales works. Oh, okay. So first of all, Mustafa, I have a couple things to help you out. One, scale practice is super, super, super important. It and arpeggio practice and cadence patterns, which you haven't gotten to yet, but you will. Things like that. They are the building blocks of technique and of harmony. We really got to understand those. They're super, super important. You don't have to be playing a ton of scales and all of that. A handful. So first of all, if if you're feeling frustrated because of the amount of time you're spending practicing scales, I would cut back that time probably a little bit. So if you have an hour a day to practice, do about 15 minutes on scales and 45 minutes on other things like repertoire that you're going to enjoy. If you are working through a method book, the other 45 minutes should be on selections from the method book. Real music, so that we don't continue to get frustrated. During your scale practice, you can add in a whole variety of ways of practicing them to help keep them fresh for you. So the primary ways that I would teach at the beginning, instead of just going through, we'll take C major, even though I can't stand that key. We'll take C major because it's always given at the beginning. Instead of just playing an octave, play 2 octaves, of course. I'm going fast just to demonstrate. Okay. In addition to that, what if we play forte? Play piano. Play detached. And this is one that I do with all of my early students, and sometimes even intermediate and early advanced students as well. Detached scale work. We want to learn how the wrist moves, and that playing the piano isn't just playing with the fingers. We can do that with some scales. Detached is usually forte, like that, and it's fairly slow. You can also practice in long, short groups. So if you're early, you're starting out, like you said, 8 months, we could do a tempo like this. For other people on the stream, if you are more advanced, long, short scale practice continues to be super valuable. I was just using it in a lesson this Monday with a student that is playing RCM 9 and 10 repertoire, but at a much faster speed, like. Because we really work on fine-tuning really quick movements from note to note across the scale. So that will continue to be a great way to practice and a great tool to use in practice, even as you continue to study on and on and on. And Mustafa, one more thing, and it might be, maybe it's too difficult right now for you with only 8 months of practicing, and maybe it's not. Depends, but you can give it a try. Try playing your scales in 2 different dynamics with the 2 hands. So if we're playing C major, can right hand be forte and left hand be piano? Can you switch that up? So right hand is piano, left hand is forte. Right? Another variation on that, probably not yet for you, Mustafa, but for others here. Can you make dynamic changes in opposite directions with the 2 hands? Can we crescendo with the right hand while we decrescendo with the left? Let's see. And then opposite direction. That'll wrap it up for today. So Mustafa, make sure you're not only practicing scales, but add repertoire in there. You say 2 hand, 2 octave becomes impossible. That's fine. That is purely building more muscle memory to make that happen. Yeah, it is just taking more time. Continue to work. Continue to work your chromatic. You said chromatics. Oh, chromatic scale. Here's another thing you can try with C major. Because your 2 hand, 2 octave is so hard, play C major in contrary motion to get you started playing both hands together. Okay? C major in contrary motion, we're going to use the same finger groups at the same time. We're going to use the same fingers at the same time in both hands, going in opposite directions. So it'll be 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Usually the problem with parallel scales is that the hands have to be independent. We're playing the same notes, but doing completely different things with left hand, right hand, right? But in contrary motion, we do the same thing with both hands. Okay? C major is the easiest one to do that with. The other scales doing them in contrary motion get a little bit harder because the physical spacing of the pitches, like D major, makes it harder to see at the beginning of our scale practice. But C major, contrary motion, can really help you to start to put both hands together. Okay. Mustafa, great question. I hope we see you again, first of all, and I hope you continue with your practice. Limit those scales to 15 minutes or fewer a day and have some more fun playing some music, because it's the music part of things. We can still learn a lot about technique via music. And yeah, we don't want to only do scales. David, thank you. Bedlington Groomer, thank you. And Kale, I think Kale signed off, but oh, maybe you didn't. So awesome. Thanks so much for being here, everybody. Remember, the next stream is in 2 weeks, February 26th. You can always send in a video of you playing, and we'll talk about it live. There's a link to do that in the description down below. And yeah, Nancy says, hit the thumbs up if you haven't. Please do that if you haven't. If you haven't already, also check out, I posted a video about a week ago on using the pedal in practice, and it didn't get recommended to a whole bunch of subscribers on here. So if you haven't checked it out, check it out. I think it's a really cool video. I'm very happy with it, and I wish more people were seeing it. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. It's the latest posting. Okay, everybody. Thanks for being here, Carlos. Welcome, and I hope to see you next time. Okay. See you in 2 weeks. Practice smarter, not harder.